Hey everybody, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research, and we're here with our final film for Indian Culture Month, which, if you're just watching this, is a month that we made up because we wanted to talk about Indian culture. So it's not a designated Heritage or History Month, which we do cover a lot of those, but we are expanding our scope to the unofficial and designating them ourselves. So up for today, we've got a 2013 documentary, Beyond All Boundaries, that is about the journey of three humans who love cricket alongside the journey of the Indian national cricket team and their attempt to claim World Cup glory in India in 2011. So they were hosting the games, which made it a lot more exciting and significant. And boy, everybody should watch this documentary. That's really what I wanted to start with. Thankfully, it doesn't make you learn what cricket is or how it works to enjoy it. I did learn a little bit about cricket, but I was thankful that they weren't like insisting on spending time telling me the rules, because would have been wasted time. To follow the story of these three people. So we get a young man named Sudhir, who is really, as Dr. Kristen said, a priest in the religion of cricket, who cycles around India following the team, and that is what he does with his entire life. We have a young woman, Akshaya, who's 17, and wants to play cricket for the rest of her life. And then a tiny little boy named Prithvi, who is an up-and-coming cricket phenom. And so we follow their stories throughout and get a lot of insights into Indian culture, Indian gender norms and politics, and why cricket is such a big damn deal.
Mm-hmm. So for a little bit of context, Dr. Aaron has almost no interaction with Indian history, Indian culture, or going to India. Fair play? Fair, true statement?
Oh, true statement. In the entirety of what I know about it, it has been with the three films we've watched, two of which I've already watched before on multiple occasions, but that's it.
So I have the privilege of spending, I don't know, about a month in India back in 2010 and researching it for an entire semester before that. As part of my graduate school curriculum in seminary, we went and spent that time backpacking our way around India to learn essentially what faith and belief looks like for people in various corners of India. So they're like just real brief history kind of thing. All of the East India companies that brought Christianity with them, because there wasn't just the British one, by the way. The Dutch were really big. The Danes had one. If we had a ship fleet at the time, I'm sure the Americans would have had one. We were busy fighting a civil war for most of colonization, so we kind of got out. Our colonization happens later and differently. But anyway, so the bottom tip a little bit, these are gross generalizations, but the bottom tip is much more Christianized, as it were. Like, I went to a Church of Scotland service in the town of Chennai. St. Thomas from the Bible supposedly is buried in southern India. Things like that. There's a lot more Christianity and Christology myth in the southern parts of India. Then as you get towards the middle and north and things, it gets progressively less Christian. Also, my friends would tell you the food gets progressively spicier. And the meats change. There, cows is like, I had beef in the bottom of India. I definitely didn't have it in the middle, like those kind of things. But one of the things that is true, no matter where we went, is that the line between organized religion, the way that a lot of Western brains think of organized religion, and lived life, the way that Western brains kind of think of that as a separation, does not exist by and large in the continent of India, nor in many other countries, but we're talking about India right now. And the lived experience of being in a certain faith in India, particularly Hinduism, like, for instance, it's actually quite pushed back against that Hinduism is a religion at all. A lot of scholars and practitioners of Hinduism and priests in various sects of Hinduism get really mad when Westerners call it a religion, because really what it is a culture. And so there's a couple things about that make this national love of cricket make a little bit more sense to me than it does in some other places. And one of them is the reason I use the word priest is that this is a culture, whatever kind of facet of Indian culture that we're talking about, this is an overall national culture that is very familiar with the idea of devotion and very familiar with the idea of dedicating either your whole life or parts of your life or orienting your life towards something other than you. It's something very, very familiar within the cultural landscape. And there are definitely people that give up their whole lives, I mean, in all cultures, to be leaders in a certain religion. And I'm not super unsure that cricket isn't a religion for some people. I'm not super unsure that the World Cup isn't like a church in some ways, or like it kind of fits some of the definitions of religion. Because the basic definition we have of religion is a whole bunch of people agreeing to worship in one direction towards something that is transcendent. And I believe that for especially some of the people we met in this documentary, cricket is transcendent. What cricket means is transcendent. The community aspect of it is transcendent. And, you know, we can talk about deities and everything else, but that gets really muddled once we leave monotheism, to be honest. Once we get into like heterogeneous religious deities, it gets a little bit more muffled to talk about deity. So I like to talk about transcendent instead. And if all of that was just way too much for you, please, I hope you ignored me for the last 3 minutes. Too long, didn't listen. This makes total sense to me in a really, really beautiful way. And the time I got to spend in India, I got to see like pieces and pockets of nearly all of this culture that they represented. It made me miss India for sure. I loved my time in India. It did not make me miss everything about India. India's a lot all the time. I did not miss sweating.
I bet you didn't miss train rides.
Did not miss train. I didn't miss the Varanasi train station, which is one of the more stressful places I've ever been in my whole life. And that's somebody who once did New Year's Eve in Times Square. The Varanasi train station on a Tuesday night was still more chaotic. But I miss watching, like when we were in Varanasi, which is a city that is a very holy city for both Buddhism and Hinduism. I got to watch a lot of kids play cricket along the shores of the river. And they just, God, they play it with so much love. And I miss that kind of stuff. I definitely miss the food. I always miss Indian food. And I missed the vibrancy of the wholehearted passion that a lot of folks on the continent bring to a lot of places in their lives. So that was all really cool. But yeah, I didn't miss sweating and I didn't miss trains. You are 100% correct. And by the way, in that whole month, I probably played cricket with like 10 to 12 different groups of children. I still do not understand cricket.
No. And that's okay too. But I think one of the things that, you know, rung true about your experiences that I recognized, having not had those experiences in India, but I know a lot about the sport of football or soccer, depending on where you're watching this in the world, and how accessible it is to learn to play it, because it doesn't require anything. Like, think about ice hockey, like you have to have skates, pads, even football. Like you could play touch football, but if you want to build your skill set really, and you can build a lot of skills in football with just a ball. You can build a lot of skills in cricket with not a lot and with makeshift equipment. So I recognize that, and I saw that translated to the emotional attachment that Indian citizens have with cricket, in that it is something that they grew up playing or saw people play, and it was always very accessible in that way. And they knew people who made the team from their home village, and like all of that stuff that we get in bits and pieces with sports here in the States, but not to this level. And like, I feel like that goes for everything I would say in a comparative sense. Like,
about India as a continent. We get some of this, but not to this level.
To this level. So like everything I would say about like, yeah, I empathize with this because I recognize it from my own experiences, but not to this level.
There's so much. I mean, like my experience, like even eating at McDonald's in India, like it's not to this level. It's just, oh my gosh, it is beautiful, but man, it's a lot. in a lot of really both heartbreaking and beautiful ways. Because the other thing we just have to flat out talk about with India is the large percentage of people that live in absolutely debilitating poverty.
Yes.
And I appreciate this documentary was not poverty porn. It was not about fetishizing suffering in any way, which a lot of documentaries about India and some other parts of the world have been, for sure. I believe Slumdog Millionaire is about fetishizing poverty, and that's one of the reasons I really hate the movie. And that's, personal opinion. But this doesn't. This is just very blatant about, this is what lived experience is. This is what it is very common for houses to cost this much and us not to be able to move out of our parents' homes because we only make this many rupees a month. And rupees are like monopoly money. There's thousands and thousands of them to buy a piece of bread, kind of thing. And so it's very, the economy is hard. There's never enough jobs for everybody. The land itself is not kind to its people. It's very hard to eke out a living entirely on subsistence farming, things like that. It's one of the reasons that vegetables are such a huge part of the diet, is that you can grow lentils in India. You can't grow a whole lot else. And so I really appreciated that within that system, cricket was still huge.
Yeah, and I think just on the issue of poverty, I agree with you, and I wanted to say that is really important, and to think critically about the way that things like access and socioeconomic status and lived experiences are portrayed in documentaries. And I felt like it was honest without glorifying it or fetishizing it or judging it.
Correct. Oh yeah, for sure. That's a great last point.
You can make a lot of the lens, you will look at it and be like, oh, how do they live in that? Like, oh, that's disgusting. Like, why can't, particularly in America where we have this, pull yourself up from the bootstraps, moral judgment system that we employ a lot with our own citizens and citizens around the world, that like, some people could look at that and say like, oh, well, they haven't done enough. And so it's really important to have this. And I think because it was made by Indians, this film, and narrated by Indians, and it was coming from a place of, this is just it. This is just life for Akshaya. This is what it looks like for her. This is how she deals with it. And not in any of those ways that can be seen as overtly negative or positive in the representation, which thankfully we're starting to get more and more of that as we advance in understanding, and less of Slumdog Millionaire ish.
And one of the other things that this documentary, I think, really just portrays is the gender dynamics of Indian culture, which are, if you think there's gender disparity in the United States, I'd like to introduce you to India. And just very reality, the lived experience of women there is very challenging and very marginalized in a lot of ways. There are definitely very powerful women in India, but that is not the norm. There are definitely states in India. Politically, India is divided into states, just like the United States. So there are states in India where I am 100% sure that child brides are still a thing. I am 100% sure that trafficking is a thing. I am 100% sure that parents sell their daughters. And all those things happen. And I would say, like, I'm 90% sure there's evidence for this. I haven't looked it up recently. And walking around India as a woman is a thing. Walking around India as a white woman was a thing, for sure. And it was something I was aware of at every single moment when I was there, and I was in a team of people, and it was still something that I was very aware of. And so to pretend otherwise, that India is a very gendered society, I think would actually do it a disservice. We need to call it out and say that's what it is. Where even pickup games, we saw this in Bend It Like Beckham with pickup games in the park, that girls weren't allowed to play football. You see it there too, that there's not a lot. I have no memory of seeing a multi-gendered cricket pickup game.
Nope.
And they're pretty clear in this documentary that all the women get paid less, like the story of women athletes around the world. But it seems that there's even extra barriers to girls playing cricket in the social expectations of girls' responsibilities within families and villages.
Yeah.
And so the even higher idea of playing cricket as a betrayal of your family.
Yeah, and that was, there were a lot of reasons why Akshaya and her mother were in the living situation that they were in, particularly with her living with her deceased father's family.
Yeah.
But you get a sense that she is going against the gender norms and expectations. And there's a joking conversation with one of her teammates about getting married and like, well, what, and like the documentarian asks her like, well, how are you going to play cricket after you're married, on the basis assumption that like she won't be allowed to do it because she won't take on the roles assigned to a wife. So I'm glad they included Akshaya in it, and we got to see bits of that. For me also, it was really interesting, and this is a person who doesn't know India, and so I'm sure you weren't surprised by this, Dr. Kristen, but watching how gendered public space was.
Oh yeah, it really is. It really, really is.
Every time they show a crowd of humans watching the cricket matches, it's all men. And the only time I remember seeing a group of women in public celebrating cricket was after they won.
Yeah.
The, like parade, and then they showed men, and then a group of women. And they showed a group of, I should say, they showed a group of young girls who were supporters outside one of the match, like talking about their favorite player. So there were groups of young girls and women at some of the matches as well. But it's exceptionally gendered visually, but obviously culturally within India and then within cricket as a subculture. So that was really educational for me in just visually seeing it, and that had value for that, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, like, there's restaurants and things like that. Like, I remember them being multi-gender spaces, and like we were certainly a multi-gender team, and so that was something that we kind of picked up on all the time. But there are absolutely spaces that are still segregated, and there are specific, especially gods I know that people worship, that demand that the belief is that the gods demand gender segregation during the worship services and things like that. And so that is, that's just a thing. That's a thing. And it is not, I am obligated to remind all of us, it is not just a thing in India. It is not just a thing in places that a lot of Americans have stereotypes about. It's a place, it happens in the United States all the time too.
All the time.
Gender segregation is just a part of this current planet. And there are places that it is more apparent and places that it is more covert, but it is a thing. And I think sport often brings that out more than you can talk to any kind of woman who really, really loves American football and really knows it and really loves it, and her experiences of going to an NFL game. Mm-hmm. And all of us female sports fans have that moment of being able to own the guy who doesn't think we know the stats. And we tell that story with pride, because like we all have it. But yeah, gendered spaces are gendered spaces. So just remember that. But yeah, from somebody who's from the perspective of somebody who has spent, I mean, almost no time, but more time than some other Americans in India, this is a great slice of life.
Yeah.
A great slice of life doc that I would recommend for sure.
Yeah. And I think for me, we talk a lot about the collective experiences, particularly of like a national sports team, and like we hesitate and move away from, blind nationalism or jingoism, except for the Olympics. And then we are like American flag waving lunatics. But it goes beyond anything you think you've ever seen. The only thing I think I might relate it to is the Miracle on Ice, really. Because even people who, and it's not the same level. I'm not at all saying it's the same level, but in terms of an event drawing such a collective, unified across the country, like I have family members who don't like hockey, but you watched that match, so like, but from what I can tell, almost everybody loves cricket in India on a level Americans can't really comprehend, because it's not our experience with sports. The largest viewing sports event in history was during this World Cup. I don't know if that's been broken, that record, since 2011. The largest sports celebration in history after they win the World Cup, spoiler alert, but I mean Google. So that for me was like, all of that was identifiable. And then that goes back to my point about like, and bigger and more.
Yeah, and I should say too, we're saying Americans as shorthand for non-Indian descendant Americans. I hope you're recognizing that. We recognize that there's millions and millions and millions of people in the United States of Indian, either direct descent, they're immigrants currently, or they are Indian Americans in a hyphenated kind of way.
Yeah.
So we're using it as a shorthand. Please know that we're recognizing that.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Americans as the sector of America that has limited interaction with Indian culture.
Correct.
So please know I'm seeing the acts begin to form. So please know we know what we're saying. And I have lots and lots of friends who are Indian American who adore cricket and spend a lot of money to watch cricket matches pay-per-view and things like that. I'd be interested to see about those viewing numbers because I'm fairly sure the most recent World Cup final in football broke that. But
might have, yeah.
I need to, and that's also just about television access that has grown since 2011.
Yeah.
And so I need to double check that. But it's an excellent reminder for every United States American that nobody watches the Super Bowl compared to every other sport in the world.
It really shouldn't be called the World Series. It should just be called the North American,
the North American Series,
of baseball. Yeah. So, I think it was such a great way to finish out our Indian Culture Month.
Yep, loved it.
With something we both sort of had knowledge of and on varying levels, but I still felt like I was totally transported to a different part of the world, which I was. And thus the beauty of documentaries. So it's definitely an educational and an empathy watch. And we invite you to watch it with generosity of mind and a place of non-judgment. That this is what people's life and lived experiences look like in other parts of the world. And our empathy for them can only grow. And our love for cricket fans, that was joyful.
Loved it.
So next up, we'll be covering Native American Heritage Month again. We're very excited that an organization of women promoting women filmmakers has put together a film festival of 4 films made by Indigenous women about Indigenous women that they will be airing in the first week of November. And we're going to watch them and talk about them because boy, does that sound exciting.
It does. We can't wait.
And keep a lookout as we go forward. We're going to start experimenting and expanding our heritage and history explorations to delve into as many different perspectives and worldviews and places around the globe as is possible. So stay with us and stay up to date on our YouTube playlist as well.
And as always, if you have suggestions for us, perhaps you are a member of one of these cultures that we've been talking about, and you would like to join us to share a piece of art from your culture with us, we would love to do that. So please get in touch as we continue to expand our knowledge of the planet. We would actually beg just for your help with that, as we are blindly Googling very often. So come join as we create a better planet, to sound like a giant cheese ball, but that's really what we're all doing these days. So until next time, where we journey to another definition of Indian, we will see you then.
Bye.